Kempley School was a child of the Education Act of 1870, the first piece of legislation to deal specifically with education in England. Although there were schools in many urban areas, schools were a rarity in the rural shires. Among the interesting clauses of the Act was a provision that women became eligible for election to school boards, this nearly 50 years before any woman in Britain was allowed to vote. The debates surrounding the Act were somewhat acrimonious, with a great deal of argument as to whether the state should pay for schools run by religious denominations. It's in this context that a ratepayers' meeting held in Kempley in February 1871 should be viewed. Tabled for discussion was a letter from local landowner Earl Beecham, as Kate Luck, who researched this aspect of Kempley's history, recounts.
He says, "I have agreed to make myself responsible for Kempley School in order to obviate the necessity of having one supported out of the rates. The cost of the school will be about £60 per annum."
His generosity wasn't, however, boundless, as the next part of the letter reveals.
"I don't think the ratepayers can complain if they are called upon to contribute £15 towards this outlay. So whether this amount be raised by subscription or voluntary rate, I do not pretend to say that either method will prevent ratepayers much expense."
This sounds somewhat dismissive, coming from a man who owned virtually all the land that lay within the Wincross parishes, and much more besides. But his letter concludes with a promise.
"I will do all that lies in my power to enable the school thoroughly official under a certified teacher." Very truly Beecham.
The Earl's offer and his conditions were accepted, with the £15 to be raised by voluntary subscription and paid half yearly to his lordship for school maintenance on June the 24th and Christmas Day, two of the traditional quarter days, the 4 dates in each year on which servants were hired and rents were due. In 1903 the school was renamed Kenpley National School with a reference number 180. Compulsory education wasn't enacted until 1880, and it's certain that attendance at Kempley School followed the national pattern of absenteeism. It was estimated that absenteeism in the 1890s often reached as high as 82%. Child labour was the norm, and in Kempley the farming seasons were sure to take children into the fields and woods at sowing and harvesting, as well as preparing for the rather more austere winter months. The renaming of the school in 1903 followed the implementation of the 1902 Education Act, which abolished all school boards and other management systems and placed all schools under the control of the local authority. Liberal and nonconformist opposition was intense. This conflict is particularly apposite to Kempley, given that there was a strong nonconformist presence in the village that was hated by the High Church Anglicans. It's no accident that the new church of St Edward's was completed in 1903. School life didn't run smoothly. The records show a dismal picture of constant staff turnover. There appear to have been distinct causal factors. Most mentioned is that the head teacher wasn't up to the job. There's clear evidence of a conflict between members on the Board of Education, with more than a whiff of interfaith conflict. Interestingly, the school name changed yet again in 1906 to the Kempley Church of England School. The behaviour of the children and their attendance, or rather lack of it, was another cause for concern.
I was just so surprised by how turbulent the life was there over its 50 years. They had a lot of letters complaining of bad behaviour of the boys. I think possibly, these children had been used to working on the land and weren't used to sitting in a classroom. And we all know that education then was very, very serious, caning and all sorts of things. And possibly a lot of them didn't want to be there. They'd rather be out picking daffodils for a few pennies than sitting on a hard desk in cold comfort, learning.
And £60 a year wasn't much to run a school on. It meant economies at every turn, which probably added to the strain.
And then they mentioned a coal bill of £1, 1 shilling and sixpence. So they actually talked about closing the school at between 12 and 1 and the children going home so that they hadn't got to put coal on the fire for that hour. So it was obviously on quite a small budget.
Another factor in the unhappy life of the school is the number of resignations, and in 2 cases failure to take up an appointment. Again and again the picture thrown up by the school records is one of poor management and partisan treatment of the staff.
The school didn't have much luck with their headmistresses. They put out inquiries for new headmistresses. Several had applied, but when they realised that only 4 of them were under 50, only those 4 could be interviewed. A quick succession of headmistresses, absolutely amazing. But the managers had reports from the Board of Education, and the inefficiency of their headmistress came up and she had to go. It seems that they really didn't know what they were doing. They were hiring and firing mistresses like 1 o'clock, really.
All this is best illustrated by the 5-year period between 1906 and 1911, when there were 3 changes of headmistress and 2 staff changes. And it went on in this vein right up until July 1918, when Kempley Church of England School was closed for good, and the pupils were moved to Dimmock School a couple of miles away.